You all are like farther forward than I am, but I'll turn to different sides and hopefully make that work. This is awfully loud. Maybe I could, you can do it from back there? Thank you. Yeah, I gotta hold it really far away. Okay, well, thank you all for coming for this first class on civic life and faith, the ELCA's stance on the relationship between church and politics. And I am Pastor Allison at Mrs. St. Andrew Lutheran Church, for the sake of our recording. All right, so let's begin with an opening prayer. Please pray with me. God of life, I thank you for the church. I thank you for baptism and for the calling we all receive. I thank you for vocation, for the challenge it poses, and I thank you for community, for different perspectives and ways of seeing. May our minds be open today, and may our hearts be open to one another. May we ponder and wrestle ideas. May we learn and grow, all the more trying to love you and love one another more. Amen. Amen. Okay, so maybe you've experienced that sometimes talking about politics can be a little bit testy and heated and challenging, and sometimes talking about religion can be the same, and we're going to do both together today. So we are going to start with the respect guidelines from Eric Law, the Kaleidoscope Institute. These are pretty standard guidelines that are used in many, many churches. So the respect guidelines, it's like an acrostic, and it has the bullets underneath are my own, and my own ideas about each of those things. So take a look at those. R is for responsibility. We take responsibility for what we say and feel without blaming other people. We use I statements. We apologize when our words have caused harm. We use empathetic listening. We try to listen on a deeper level to understand where the other person might be coming from. We're sensitive to differences in communication styles. So some people really can jump in and speak right off the bat, and other people need more time to process. Some people feel very comfortable speaking to a group like this or a small group. Other people, that takes a lot of courage for them to speak. So one thing that I'd love for you to remember when we do have a table discussion is the take space, make space concept. So if you have noticed that you haven't been saying anything, if there's something that you might want to contribute, I encourage you to try to take the risk to do that. If you notice that you have been saying a lot, definitely, please don't be the one to speak next for a while, okay? Give space for other people in case other people want to take some space. Okay. Ponder what you hear and feel before you speak. So be curious about your own perspective, your own thoughts and emotions. Where did that come from? How did you come to that belief? Examine your own assumptions. Ask questions about what has shaped you, and understand that that's just one perspective among many. Keep confidentiality. So this is asking permission to share information that might be confidential, but also just in general, speaking respectfully of one another, even when that person isn't around. So let's speak respectfully of one another, even after our conversation today, and during, hopefully. And then trust ambiguity. This one's really important for today. So we're not here to figure out what the right answer is. Today, we are, in this class, we're looking at the ELCA social teaching on this issue. And you'll have the opportunity to share your thoughts and to bounce off of it, but we're not here to figure out who's right. We're just learning and what the ELCA stance is, and then we're thinking about that and discussing it together. And we will have different perspectives, and we're not gonna just come out of this with, here's the right answer. If everyone is thinking alike, somebody isn't thinking. So please take the risk of voicing an alternative view. Anything else that we need to add when we're thinking about how to have respectful conversations with each other? Okay, great. All right, shall we get into it? Here we go. Discipleship in a democracy. So there is an article I really like in Living Lutheran from 2020 that is by Michael Cooper White, and you see an image there that accompanies that article. What do you see in this image? Just shout things out. A church. We got a church over there in the left corner. A rift. I thought it was a fence, but I think it's actually like a rift in the ground. I think you're right. Look, there's somebody walking on a balance, trying to get across the two. There's a chasm. Yes. You see two churches? Say more, Gretchen.
The building on the right is structured as if it were a church building.
Oh, interesting. It kind of has a structure like a church building, right? I think it says state building on the sign. Yeah, I think it says state building technically on the sign. Okay. So the article that this came from, I have copies of if anybody wants to take it home and read it between our class, between this week and next week or anytime. And it's also online. So if you just look it up online, it's just available for free online. So you can find it online if you want to look at it up later. But this first exercise we're going to do is directly from this article. Okay? So these quotes are all from this article. Would you be willing to read one of the ones? Pick one.
Pastor, I was really upset by Sunday's sermon. You're meddling in politics, which you have no business doing. I also hear that you participated in those recent protests. Don't you understand the separation of church and state?
Thank you. Another one? Would you be willing to read, Larry?
Sure. As a young person, I am deeply concerned about social justice, and I find little to no support for my convictions in my church.
Thank you. Would you be willing to read one?
Some of us are frustrated that our church won't take a stand. Aren't we named for a protester, Martin Luther? Don't we point with reverence to martyrs like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who took a very political stance?
Thank you. Maybe Gretchen, will you do the last one?
I don't want my church to tell me how to vote, but I would welcome some guidance on how to prayerfully cast my ballot.
Interesting. So at your tables, or maybe join with a table if you're not at a table. Some of the tables have more people than others, so find a small group to discuss with. Do you see yourself in any of these comments? Which ones and what aspect of the comments, if you feel comfortable sharing? Go ahead and share with others if you see yourself in any of these. Another question to add to your conversation. Which of these types of comments have you heard here at St. Andrew? If anybody hasn't had a chance to speak, maybe make sure they get a chance to share if they want to. Let's come back together. Okay, let's come back together. Raise your hand if you saw something of yourself in one of these comments or more. Some people maybe not. Okay, who saw themselves in one of these comments and feels comfortable admitting to that and sharing us what they saw? You've already spoken, so let me see. Try somebody else.
Well, in the last one, the lavender one, prior to attending the Lutheran church, this was even way before Larry and I went to a quote-unquote fundamentalist church. And I can't remember the year. I don't even know if I was old enough to vote at that time. But I do remember there were local elections coming out, and there were papers passed out, not who to vote for, but recommendations.
Interesting. And what do you, so with that, where do you connect in terms of what you would prefer?
Not to do that. We all, and we have a variety of opinions here, even within our own congregation, and that's okay. Discussion is good.
What else? Who else connected with something up here, even just one aspect of it? Oh, okay. You have something else? Here, tell us.
And anybody, I have a lot of copies of this, so if anybody wants one, it's really a good way to live. And something I wrote at the bottom, let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
Thank you. So if you'd like one of those handouts, she has extras, you can take one. It has a bunch of other things on it too. Yeah, Tom.
Good way to live.
Yeah, thank you. Do you identify or see yourself in any part of these?
Yeah, and Pat had brought up, and one of the things that I remark on as I listen to, the sermons, the Gospels and whatnot, about how Jesus was always looking out for the poor, the oppressed. We're supposed to be welcoming the stranger, proclaiming to the Gentiles and whatnot, and how some people, in the name of conservatism or whatever, can be wanting to exile people and whatnot because of, their immigrant status. So I certainly feel much more, at this point in my life, the upper right quadrant.
The upper right, he said he identifies with that one. Yeah, because it sounds like what you were connecting a lot of Jesus's teachings to things that happen in our political life, and you're saying, well, it seems like there's a clear connection here. Any others that we identify with that we want to share? Yeah, Tira.
I'd just build a little bit on what Tom just said, because it's not just that Jesus told us those things, it's built into the law of Leviticus to look after the poor, the oppressed, the orphan, the exiled, the stranger and the wanderer, right? So it's not just that it's from the beginning. And so I guess I feel frustrated, not so much that whether I hear it here or not, but when I hear it being used politically, the other way around, when I hear politicians using religion, and I'm like, wait, what? Like, what do you? Because then I feel manipulated from the other side. Like, we're not supposed to discuss it here, but they feel free to bring it out in their speeches.
That's very interesting, yes. Okay. Gretchen, do you still want to share? You're very welcome.
Why not? I agree with Bonnie on I don't want my church to tell me how to vote. I don't want the church to tell me how to think. But I do desperately need help on how to feel and how to connect with other people.
Thank you. Okay, one more prompt about these little blurbs that you can discuss in your table. What is true and valid about each of these comments? And what do they all have in common? Give it a shot. In your small groups when you're ready. What is true about each of them? What's valid and true about each one? And what do they all have in common? Okay, finish up your idea. All right. So let's start with the bottom right. What is true and valid about that you would identify? Something you could resonate with or you could validate about that? Anybody? The lower right corner. What's valid about that? Yeah.
I don't know what makes it valid, but I like the word guidance in that one because I see in all things the church being a guiding noun.
Yeah, there's a concept of the church offering guidance, and so she resonates with that and would want to agree with that, aspect of it. That does seem like an aspect of what church should do. Yeah.
I think your question was what's valid about it, and it's always valid if it's a personal opinion.
Yeah. Do you have any? Did you want to say anything you found personally valid about it?
Oh, well, yes, the guidance that I don't want someone to tell me how to vote normally. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So validation and true, like the way that I'm asking the question is what is valid here? It's what do you find valid? What resonates for you? What could you find common ground with? It's not like a objective valid. Okay, yeah, so a lot of people have shared that they don't want the church to tell them how to vote, that they resonate with that, but like the idea of the church offering guidance. Okay, what about the one up in the upper right? Is there anything that resonates with you about that? Yeah.
I think for me, there are times when there are things that are happening in politics or in our society that are deeply wrong, and the church does need to take a stand because it is the only really moral way to be. The difficult part is identifying when that is, but I think if we take the stand that we're never going to engage in politics, we will be bystanders when horrific things happen.
Thank you. So she's saying she resonates with that idea that that we need to take a stand. And I mean, there's truth in here. We are named for a protester, Martin Luther. That is just true. And we do lift up like a lot of our saints and the people that we lift up as role models were very politically engaged. So those things are true. And then we might resonate personally or not with the idea that the church should be doing that. Yeah.
For me, it makes me, not being raised in Lutheran, but associated with it now, it makes me very proud. Because anybody who knows me knows I am, oh Lord, somewhat liberal. And the things that the ELCA are standing for, I agree with 100%, and it makes me proud to be a member of that.
Well, St. Andrew took a stand on reconciling in Christ. We took a stand when the families are separated at the border. We had a debate during the Second Iraq War on whether that was a just war.
Yeah, another one. Yep. No, that's great. We got a couple
to talk about. So this one is, I've just realized, is the one that I am with, because this idea of politics and church mixing, politics is policy forming, and it's about the community we live in. And so trying to find policies we can live with that align with the values of the church, of what we proclaim, the 5 pillars of our church.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. It's like sometimes when people say we're not supposed to talk about politics, I'm like, well, what is politics? Like, are we allowed to talk about community? Like, are we allowed to talk about our neighborhood? Like, what makes something politics and what makes something okay for us to talk about?
Yeah, I've got 2 things. One is I remember a synod convention a few years ago. Former Bishop Dave Barariki pointed out the difference between politics and partisanship. Politics comes from the Greek word polis, which means city, and there's a big difference between politics and partisanship. You don't want to you don't want to engage in partisanship from the pulpit, but there's nothing wrong with engaging in politics, right? Second thing is, yeah, I want, yeah. As far as how deeply you get into politics in the church, I remember at one time when Pastor Mark was here, I think it was President George W. Bush that used the phrase "axis of evil" to apply to certain countries, and Pastor Mark says, well, when politicians start using words like evil, they're getting into my territory. And I think I have a right to comment on that. So there's a dividing line there that was crossed.
Good point. Okay, one more before we go on to the next thing. Yep.
I think we need to, with regard to all of these, keep in mind that deeply rooted in the biblical tradition and in the tradition of the church is the notion of the prophetic word, and it is not really at all foretelling the future, it's challenging the present. And I think if we abandon that entirely, we're not faithful to the tradition, it seems.
Right, and those prophets went to the king. They went to the political leader and spoke truth to power in those situations. Okay, the lower left, I think, has a lot of similarities to the upper right, so I was going to kind of skip over that one and go on to the one in the upper left. What's true about this? Or what do you resonate with? Yep. Oh, someone who hasn't spoken yet. Thank you.
I'm older. I don't know that I'm the oldest one in this room, but I'm probably right up there. But I grew up in the 50s. Well, actually, I started out in the 40s, but 50s. And back then, it was a given that there was separation of church and state. I mean, it was just, at least from my perspective. And it just seems, it's alarming that there's a blurring now of that. And I fear the loss of that separation. And I just wish the next generation or two the best of luck.
Thank you for sharing that. So one thing that is true that she was lifting up, this concept of separation of church and state, we do have like an intersubjective concept of the separation of church and state, and we'll go into later in the class what that really is and what that really means and what it does not mean. So that does exist, kind of. You know, it's not like there's nothing that says like the separation of church and state in our Constitution or something like that. But we have this concept, and we also, you know, have people who there's something that they value, and that there's some concern about, you know, mixing in some ways. Okay, something else that's true or that you resonate with about this?
Well, I'm a child of the 60s. And at about that time, I noticed that pastors and priests were taking very active stances on things like the Vietnam War. I can remember my pastor saying that he didn't believe that it was right from the pulpit. And civil rights, when you saw pastors marching. So I think, I won't say any more than that, just that I don't think necessarily we have to have a shut door when it comes to church and politics. Because otherwise we're bystanders of evil. Anything else? Yeah, Noelle?
I find it very upsetting, even makes me very angry when someone uses their religion to support a politician. and to say, well, it was God's desire that this politician be a leader, no matter what religion you're in. That.
It's so true, though. It's like we laugh, like maybe that's, you know. That's what I hear at my house. Oh, okay. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Well, extrapolating or maybe taking some guesses at what might be under a statement like upper left, I'm also thinking like maybe there's a desire, maybe, I'm guessing, would have to talk to this person, like a fear of, creating a split within the church where people just get more and more polarized from one another. Maybe there's a fear that if we take a stand, then we will ostracize other people, and we really care about our church and want to have some sense of cohesion, so we should just not, we shouldn't talk about those things. And probably a lot of your families have experimented with different, not talking about politics at the Thanksgiving table types of policies. So I wonder, if they're, and we can maybe resonate with that like we want to be able to stay in community with each other. But yeah.
I also have to check myself on a regular basis because while that statement is not true for me, when I hear someone from the other side, from where I am, which is of course the right side, the correct side, not the right side. Yeah, exactly. But when I hear folks on the other end of the spectrum meddling in politics from the pulpit, using their religion to justify their points of view, I get really angry. And so I have to check myself and make sure I'm not doing the same thing, even though I'm right.
Right. So it's like, are you angry because they're using their faith to explain why they act politically? Or are you just angry that they interpret their faith differently than you? And so should we all just not interpret our faith at all for the sake of politics? Or should we all interpret our faith to inspire how we act politically, and we're going to interpret it differently? Yeah.
Well, personally, I don't mind people from the pulpit or any place else telling me how to vote, because I'll give you the example. I've been part of the pro-life community for years, and I get literature from them every election cycle, and they give me the list of candidates who are pro-life. And so the expectation is that if I believe in their principle, I will vote for these people. The other side, this is not the church, but I belong to the American Federation of Government Employees, which is a union, and I get information from them and the Democratic Party to, they give their own recommendations, who's pro-union. So both sides engage, and we just have to be smart enough to realize, choose between them. Otherwise,
Thank you.
We don't have a viewpoint.
Otherwise, we're pretending we don't have a viewpoint.
Quasi-neutrality.
Right. Yeah, the quasi-neutrality. Interesting. Okay, so a quote from this article that you can take home if you'd like to read it later. Each of those wide-ranging views, those 4, represents the stance of some members in a typical ELCA congregation. It's little wonder then that much of the conflict we experience in the church today is generated by differing views about the proper relationship between church and state, faith and politics. And a lot of churches really struggle with that. I'm new here, so I don't know, the form that has taken or not taken here. But I think it's a really important issue to be thinking about. So we are an ELCA congregation, and that doesn't mean we have to agree with the ELCA on everything. But I do think it's wise for us to know what the ELCA is saying about the things that we care about. Okay, so that we know where we stand in relationship to this body that we are a part of. So this is why I think it would be interesting to dive into that for these couple weeks. So where would we go to find out what the ELCA has to say about the relationship between church and state, faith and politics? The website. Great. Good. I went to the website and I found on the website three different aspects of ELCA's social teaching. The ELCA puts out social statements, social messages, and also social policy resolutions. So the ELCA as a denomination does take stands on things. So that in and of itself says something about what they think the relationship is between church and politics, is that they're actually making stands. And they have different kinds of teaching documents, such as social statements, social messages, and then policy resolutions are a little bit different. So a social statement is a teaching and policy document that provides the framework that helps us think about and discuss social issues in the context of faith and life. At least that's what they're hoping to try to do in a social statement. So it's supposed to help us with our formation as Christians, help us discern how to engage with the current issues through the lens of trying to build the kingdom of God. It also, these social statements guide the policy that the ELCA then sets and guide its advocacy work. So you may be aware that the ELCA takes a couple different forms. We have one God in three persons. We also have one church in three expressions, we call it. One church in three expressions is the ELCA. So the first expression you're very familiar with, the congregation. That's the first expression. The second expression is the synod level. So that's like a like regional area. So for us, it's the synod, the Oregon Synod. So that's the next expression. And we have a bishop's office located in Portland of the Oregon Synod. And they take stands and they do things in the world as well as supporting us as congregations. And then the third one is what do they call it? I call it church-wide, but like the whole denomination as a whole. And we have an office in the Chicago area where the presiding bishop works and is her home base, and we have all kinds of different programs at the church-wide level, at that big denominational level, including outreach and advocacy and community services and supporting the synods and supporting the congregation. There's all kinds of stuff that the denomination level does. So these policies guide the advocacy that is done, that the denomination is doing with our political reality here in the United States. So our church does engage politically. And these social statements have an extensive process where they identify a fairly large team of people, and that team of people does a study across the whole church. They have theologians on the team. They do a lot of listening to the church. They come up with a draft statement, and the draft is put out to all the churches, and all the churches can read it and give input on it. And then eventually it gets down to the actual final draft that then has to be passed at a church-wide assembly. So when we have like our governing meeting every 3 years and representatives from all over the country come together, they have to vote, and that's how it becomes a social statement. How many social statements do we have? Take a guess. At least one. That's a pretty safe guess. 3, 27, 100. We have 13. Fewer than I thought. We have 15. Oh, excuse me, 13. 13. We have 13. Anybody know any of them? Anybody can name any of them, or even just the topic that one of them might be on? Human sexuality, gift, and trust. 2009. We know that one, right? If you know one, that's probably the one you know. Any other? Yeah. We have one on women. Yes. Gender. We have one on gender and sexism. War. Do we have one on war? We have one on peace. Let's look. Here are our social statements. These are the topics. The first 3 to be published, or to be at the very first church-wide assembly, the first 3 social statements were passed in 1991. Church and society, abortion, and the death penalty. Those were the priorities for the constitutors of this church, to get a social statement written immediately on those 3, which I find interesting. and then we'll look at what else has come along over time. So if you're interested in any of those topics and what the ELCA has to say about it, you can Google the social statement on one of those things. The one that's most relevant for our question is Church and Society from 1991, as well as a new social statement that is not on the list yet, that is in draft form, that we'll get to look at a little bit during this class. Social messages are topical documents. They're very similar to social statements, but they can get passed faster. They don't require quite as extensive of a process, and therefore they're not allowed to set new policy. And so they have more restrictions on them. They're shorter, but they can get passed more quickly for, the things that we need to respond to, more quickly than 3 years from now. So these are used to address pressing contemporary concerns. No new policy. They are a little more specific, a little more narrow than our social statements. And these only have to be passed by the Conference of Bishops and the ELCA Church Council. So we don't need a church-wide assembly in order to pass one of these, hence being passed faster. How many social messages do you think we have? We have 16. What do you think they're about? Racism, immigration, sexism. They're about a lot of the same things, right? Yeah, AIDS was the first one. Israel, Palestine, back in the 80s. Yeah. So that's a great question. I didn't look into that because right now we are doing a revision of one of our social statements, and I'm not sure how that would then in the future be listed like this, if it would like replace the old one because it's a revision or what. I'm not sure. I don't know if social statements get revised. Great question. Mm-hmm. And becomes a social statement. That's a great question. I don't think so, because we actually have a pair of them that we have several pairs that you'll see, and we're in the process right now as an ELCA of developing a new pair. The social message portion has already come out, and the social statement has not yet come out. So we'll look at those in these class. Okay, and the last thing is policy resolutions. Oh, yeah. Because that's the one that we're gonna look at. That's the one that has to do with our topic today. We're going to look at that one.
One question?
Yeah.
When was the ELCA founded?
Anybody know?
No, it was 87 or 88.
Yeah, so the Constituting Convention was in April of 1987, and the official, legally, the ELCA began to exist on January 1st, 1988. Yes. Evangelical, yes. Yeah, evangelical has taken on its own meaning in our current political reality, which is a challenge that we as the ELCA face with what to do with that word, right? Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of debate on whether to drop the E or not. Yeah, it's there's a lot of debate on that, because some people are like, well, what it's come to mean isn't what it means. We don't have to lose our word because someone else has co-opted it. We're going to hold on to it and lift up what it really means. And other people say it's just confusing, and it's just it's a barrier for people. So I think that's an interesting debate. Okay, finally, social policy resolutions. So these are very specific, a position on a specific social question at a specific social time. So at a particular time, sometimes it's, something that's happening in Congress or something, something very specific. And these have to be consistent with our social statements and social messages. So they are adopted by the church-wide assembly or the church council. And we have, guess how many of these we have? Yeah, we have bazillions of them. I have no idea. It doesn't say on the website. There's just a search bar. and you can search for something. Yeah, okay. So in order to think about the ELCA's teaching on the relationship between church and politics, we want to look at a couple important documents. I want to cover these 4 documents in our class these couple weeks. Okay, the first is the ELCA Constitution itself, because that says what a church is supposed to be. So when we think about the relationship between church and politics, I think that goes to the very heart of the question of ecclesiology, which is the study of church. What is the church? What is the church supposed to be in the world? So we're going to look at the Constitution. Then we're going to look at the very first social statement that was passed in the ELCA, the Church and Society, a Lutheran Perspective, in 1991 at the very first churchwide assembly in 1991. And then we will look at what happened in 2019 at the churchwide assembly, where a new group of messages were called for. And that led us to the 2020 social message and the hopefully 2025 social message that is not yet passed. Okay, so first, we got this already. The Constituting Convention of the ELCA, April 30th, 1987 in Columbus, Ohio. That's when we adopted the Constitution. This was a merger of 3 different predecessor bodies, and they had to come up with a Constitution, and our Constitution is a bit of a mishmash of things from those 3 different church bodies, and some would argue that because of that mishmash, the Constitution doesn't work very well because it's kind of trying to be several different systems at once. And we currently have a group that is studying our Constitution with the eye toward the possible revision of and like reconstituting the church under a more under a constitution that is a little bit more like internally consistent and like kind of works better in one system rather than trying to take a bunch of different ways of doing church and smash them all together. Yes. Mm-hmm.
As sort of kind of reasonably a new Lutheran, what prompted the formation of the ELCA?
That's a great question that I would have to do more research on to find out the answer. And instead of having somebody else share some answers, let's leave that for another class. But that's a great question. And so yes, January 1st, 1988 is when the ELCA was born. I was 2 months old. So the ELCA is my age. So when you think of the age of the ELCA, think of me. All right, so the ELCA Constitution, all of our constitutions, including our, 37. Yeah, if you were doing a quick math, 37, I think. Yeah, I'm 37? 37 or 38, something like that. I think it's 37. So our Constitution, Chapter 4 of our Constitution, this is the Constitution of the denomination. So that expression, the denomination Constitution, not our church congregation's Constitution. This expression, we have our own Constitution. And that has a lot of similarities to this one, but just keep in mind, this is for church-wide, for that expression of the church, the denomination. The purpose of the church, according to this Constitution, the church is a people created by God in Christ, empowered by the Holy Spirit, called and sent to bear witness to God's creative, redeeming, and sanctifying activity in the world. You see our Trinitarian, there, creative, redeeming, and sanctifying, Creator, Christ, and Holy Spirit there. And then we have to participate in God's mission, this church shall. And this is the purpose of the ELCA as a denomination, to proclaim God's saving gospel. And it goes on. I didn't print it all out because it was too long. To carry out Christ's Great Commission. To serve in response to God's love, to meet human needs, caring for the sick and the aged, advocating for dignity, justice, and equity for all people. Working for peace and reconciliation among the nations. So we're engaging in, the political world, at least according to C. So there's some sense, there's foundation here in our founding documents that we engage with political realities through advocating for equity and seeking peace and reconciliation among the nations. It's not clear exactly how we're supposed to do that, but it does have a sense that we are engaging with the world here. We're supposed to worship God, nurture its members, manifest the unity given to the people of God. Continued, receive, establish, and support the congregations, encourage and equip to serve God in the world. So what does it mean to serve God in the world? That's where some interpretation can come. And then down at G, to work in concert with other forces for good in the world, to serve humanity, cooperating with the church and other groups, participating in activities that promote justice. So a lot of people point to that as, a foundation for the church engaging in political activity if they feel like that political activity is working towards justice or trying to relieve misery. Then we have to fulfill these purposes. How's the church supposed to fulfill these purposes? This church shall assure faithfulness, publish a periodical. I love that that's in there. Study social issues and trends. Work to discover the causes of oppression and injustice. We're supposed to look at root causes. Develop programs of ministry and advocacy to further human dignity, freedom, justice, and peace in the world. The church, this is the church-wide denomination, is supposed to work with civil authorities in areas of mutual endeavor, maintaining institutional separation of church and state, there we go, in a relation of functional interaction. What? Yeah, functional, right? As opposed to direct line edict, maybe? Mm-hmm. Okay. Here, why don't you share with us?
So having come from a system engineering standpoint, functional means the function that you do, and it's more of a, it's a function, how you do it. But straight line reporting, directive reporting is not what we do. We do not direct line report with the police or anything like that. That's not what we do. But we function together. We have functions that we share in common that we work with. So it is a separation, even though it seems like it says functional relationship. Well, it's like an org chart thing, but it's not a direct line, it's a dotted line.
Very interesting. Not a direct line, a dotted line. Yes. So it's having this, so this is a big thing that a lot of our social statements will at least touch on, okay? So we're supposed to maintain institutional separation in a relation of functional interaction. And so we have to go to our 1991 Church and Society social statement to hear a little bit more about what that means. And then we're actually going to have to go back in history to a social statement from one of our predecessor bodies, because that's what this language was lifted from. And so next week, we will get to find out a little bit more about what the ELCA means by that.
What about the U.S. Constitution? And is it just the First Amendment that separates church and state, or is there other?
Right. So we will also have a review next week of the First Amendment and what it says and what it doesn't say, and where that concept of separation of church and state came from. Is it an American concept? We're going to look into some of those things next week. So I hope that you join us. If you would like one of these to read, then you'll kind of know the answers already. But I think it's a really good article. I really like it. Otherwise, you can look it up online. So yes, thank you all so much. See you next week.